Hi, I'm your host, Marlo Lemon, and you're listening to Wild Voice, the podcast where I take this voice of mine and share my wild journey with you. Being widowed at 34 with a 15-month-old, most would see as life ending. And instead, I alchemized it and put life back together, and it became more beautiful and fulfilling than I could have ever imagined. Through this life shift of mine, I realized who I am and what I'm here to do. I'm an intuitive energy healer, and sharing how I view the world is how I help you upgrade your life and alchemize your journey into magic. From day one, I wanted to share my journey, call it intuition, but I knew it was going to do more good out in the world than keeping it to myself. So when I say I've mastered life, that doesn't mean I'm perfect or that life is. I mean, I've mastered the concept of life, and I want to share that with you. I think we underestimate the power of habits, something we do over and over again that produces a result. Not always desired, but for sure curated. My habits up to this point were rooted in beliefs that life is meant to be hard, that people leave, and that no matter what type of person you are, you can't stop bad things from happening to you. Heavy, right? How powerful I must be to think that way and to get my life unfolding the way it did. Well, I proved myself right, but how badly I wanted to be wrong. Since the definition of a belief is just something repeated to us over and over again, that means it can be changed too. A belief is only as powerful as the power we give it, and it gets that power by the habits we support it with. Up to this point, my habits were supporting my beliefs, and I don't have to remind you how that went. We sometimes think worrying and expecting the worst almost keeps us from the shock factor, from the bad things happening. We're on high alert and expecting the worst. That means nothing will get past us, and maybe we'll be prepared for the best. Or maybe we think it will limit the pain when something doesn't go as we thought. I'll tell you, it doesn't. If anything, handling life this way, or using my energy and brain power in that manner, actually makes me look back and wonder, why didn't I use that powerful manifesting energy for good? Or save myself the exhaustion of what that does to a mind, body, and soul, always expecting the worst? Maybe we do this because we think hoping for the best makes us naive, especially if we don't have logical proof on how a situation can play out to our benefit. Take it from me. The world doesn't work that way. I promise you. I have tested this out both ways, and guess which one has produced a more magical, fulfilling life? Instead of fueling exactly what I don't want to happen and exhausting myself along the way, how about actually getting what I do want out of this life and rooting to the fact I'm always in the right place at the right time? It's my perception that gets to be the judge of that. I always felt untrusting of people. I would second guess everything, even my own choices. How debilitating that is to not trust the one person who will and has always been there for you. You. By assuming everyone was untrustworthy, all that did was send the belief to myself that I don't make good choices and that I am powerless. I'm incapable. So what that did is create habits in a life where I got reasons to prove myself right. Our mind ultimately wants to support us, and it knows supporting us means giving us examples of our beliefs, no matter what they are. If we believe something, the universe, source, always insert whatever you believe in when I say source. For me, that is my word for a higher power. So, source will naturally give us those examples that were right. Think of it like placing an order. When we order food at a restaurant, do we place the order, then wonder why we get what we asked for? And without having to tell them how to do it? How we think is placing our order to the universe. Then we need to leave space for the unknown. It's not up to us to be stubborn on how we get it, or prepare ourselves the whole time on how we won't. But I already know you get that. You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if that wasn't the case. You've known all along. I'm just reminding you. My opportunity to change my beliefs was a welcomed reprieve to how I was living my life. Who says I can't change the belief? to good things happen to me, that life can be easy, and that people stay. And they don't just stay, but they actually show up even more when shit gets hard. And if life does change, then having the understanding there is a damn good reason for it, and it's always for the highest good of everyone involved. And how about the belief that I can support my family with passions and a vocation that lights my soul on fire, not just something I think will create a paycheck? And how about that life can be abundant and fulfilling and financially freeing? Because after all, that's why I'm here. At the end of the day, I'm here to evolve, to live out my soul purpose, and leave this place better than I found it. And that doesn't mean by being perfect. Sometimes not being perfect is exactly what life needs. I refer to everything before this big event as my old life. In that life, I didn't feel fulfilled. I had moments, but not a deep understanding or way of being that resonated with that. So this was my sign. This was my understanding that what I was doing up to this point wasn't working. So time to throw the rule book out and create a new plan. A new idea of what I wanted life to look and feel like. That was clear to me from day one of this new life. I just wasn't quite sure how to get there. But I did know I couldn't do it alone. Not yet. It's like throwing someone into a new job and telling them to figure it out with no training or an address of where to show up. I had to get clear on what I wanted, and I started with wanting to get through Bob's service. I had an intuitive understanding that real life, not grieving widow life, was going to start the day after that service. I could feel it. So until then, I felt like I was in limbo between my old life and the new one. But I was actually exactly where I was meant to be. It was slowing me down and prepping me for the next stage. Sometimes we have these holding spots where it feels real annoying, real uncomfortable, and we get real impatient. Don't fight it. Lean into it. Anytime I've done that, it has produced a much more fulfilling and comfortable result. And sometimes the resistance is what is holding us in that pattern longer. Surrendering to the shitstorm sometimes is the quickest, most complete way through it. Just something to think about. The plans for the service felt like they were happening quickly, and I felt like I had no say. Like the pain my family was trying to shield me from was actually being magnified by feeling left out of the planning. Like I had no say or opinion or control on how we were going to bring people together to say our goodbyes to my husband and celebrate his life. A life I was confused on if he even wanted it celebrated. It was for sure for all of us. For Nash. For him to look back and see how loved his dad was, and how sad and disappointed we were that he was gone. Maybe one of the many pieces I would share with him, so he would know this isn't the choice we make. That Bob's choice will now be the reason that never is Nash's. The conversation and worries and stress about the service came to a very big head and quickly. Things were said, voices were raised, and frustrations boiled over with my parents and I. And, like always, my younger sister had my back. She used to yell at my parents in my defense when she felt like things didn't go my way. Like back in high school when I asked to spend the night at my boyfriend's with a bunch of our friends after prom my junior year. That was a hard fuck no. Well, I took it and didn't put up much of a fight. And without even discussing a plan of action, she came barreling out of her room, chirping and squawking all the reasons why they sucked and they were unfair parents. I think she was more mad than I was. So when it came to the service, I just wanted everything to slow down for a bit. It had only been days since Bob died, and I was still processing things and felt like I was on borrowed time. But none of us knew how to be. None of us knew the right answer. We just knew we were missing a part of our family. And we were just so disappointed he was gone. There aren't many facts when it comes to grief, but one I promise to be true is everyone has their different ways of dealing with that initial trauma. This planning, making it a nice event, and keeping me out of it so they could control what they could was my family's way. Although not the most productive moment as a family, voices were heard, and plans started to be shifted a bit. Things started to be toned down, I started to be looped in, and I was even able to be clear on what was important to me about this celebration of life. I wanted people to be present and in the moment. I wanted it to be raw, no bells and whistles. I wanted it to stand on what we were there for. to talk about memories of someone we were going to miss terribly. One of my tasks was the dreaded slideshow, the one you all dread, and you'll cry. Because it's intense to stare at a bunch of pictures of someone you miss. The pictures that are the only physical thing you have left of that person. And the music. The music for sure helps cue the waterworks. It's like we torture ourselves. I almost didn't want to do the slideshow for that reason. Like it was painful enough. Why make it that much harder? But luckily, everyone pushed for that one, and I put myself in charge of rounding up everyone's pictures. There was a healing aspect to it. And not being tech savvy, I of course needed help putting it all together. One of the girls, their dad, took the reins. And after I picked out every song and the order it would go in, he put it together. It was a healing process in itself, and an opportunity for me to see more examples of learning to look for the helpers when shit feels like it's really bad. I was spotting a lot of those, and that was making this process easier than you would imagine. We ended up deciding on April 21st for Bob's service at a golf course that had a cute red barn as an event space. The service was scheduled for almost a month after Bob died. I mean, at this point, it wasn't like he was going anywhere. And there was an Arizona girls' trip that had been planned for the weekend before, months earlier. For many reasons, I had planned back then not to go, but you probably can guess. The girls took this opportunity to get me out and change my scenery. I felt so awkward. Like I needed to be getting things done. I needed to focus on Bob. I needed to be there for Nash. Well, you find out very quickly there are rules when someone dies. And I don't know who made them up, but I suggest making up your own. Because at this point, how you go about life is for the people still here and how you show up for them. So me taking a breather and getting a change of scenery was probably the healthiest thing for me, and in turn, Nash. And it is possible to equally miss someone and continue with life. Some people feel guilt for living a life after someone passes, like it discredits their absence. That's an example of a belief we've told ourselves. It actually honors the person they helped us become. Grief is the strangest thing. It also seems to have unwritten rules too. Throw it all out. And know it's there, and the heaviness of it can be released, so that we can be left with the sweet parts, that we get to love someone so much that no amount of time in this world would have ever been enough. From here, we can see that how we live our life going forward gets to honor that relationship and that love. I knew I wanted to tell stories about Bob and share memories. My family had decided filming the service was going to be a pretty special thing and something Nash could look back at and learn more about his dad. So I sat with it for a bit and sent an email out to a handful of friends that were a big part of our life together and Bob's growing up. This was the start of me learning how to ask people for help and what I wanted without feeling like I was being an inconvenience. There was this undertone of worry that people would just randomly show up at Bob's service, especially maybe men that had a relationship with him. And that just wasn't something I was ready to move through that day. So everyone was on high alert to keep this service private. So anyone who was invited was given that same understanding to keep it intimate. It was interesting to be planning a service like this, remembering someone we all loved so much, and to have this other aspect that no one knew about. It wasn't the right time. It didn't feel right to share it with anybody at this time. It felt right to have a service where we could remember Bob the way we all really knew him. But having that undertone of worrying about someone showing up or reaching out to me, that was just an interesting thing to process during a time like this. The weeks leading up to the service, I was working on healing myself and consistent therapy and healing sessions while replacing physical reminders of my old life with new ones. I can't tell you how many trips I made to Target. Nash and I would just wander the aisles. I would buy things to replace old things from my old life that I didn't want up in the apartment. How crazy something as simple as a frying pan can remind you to be sad. I needed a fresh start. I needed new things without old memories for my own healing and process. Friends would come in and out. Par, she'd be there every day. And if she wasn't with me, her pregnant ass was working on selling my house. The girls, well, they were on rotation and coming in and out of town, overlapping with each other's schedules, so I was never alone. Our nights would turn into us processing what the hell just happened to life and how we were making sense of it. and what would come up each day or new thing thrown onto the fire. I valued our times together so much. That was healing in itself. The fact I could put Nash to sleep, which they would witness the fight of no nap Nash, and then come out to talk about the day, and how my now breastfeeding boobs were rock hard and had a mind of their own. The little things. My boobs represented the confusion that was spiraling in all of us. To be able to see that gratitude for this village in the thick of it, it's a sight to see. It's like gratitude on crack. One day, while I was doing my new normal up in the apartment, I saw a car pull up into the driveway, and I heard my mom call for me. When I saw the woman get out of the car, I saw one of Bob's coworkers. He called her his work mom. She was one of the people I'd have speak at Bob's service. She was bringing over Bob's desk items, his personal belongings that were left at work. When I got down there, we hugged, with tears in our eyes, and she turned to hand me the box of Bob's things. She told me how sad they were and how at a loss they felt and helpless. They wanted to do anything they could to help Nash and I. She apologized for having to ask, but said she needed Bob's work phone and computer back. Of course, with Pa around, we had already tried to check everything out on those devices, and they were clean as a whistle, from what we could tell. But my mom was standing there, and as I handed them over, she said, "When you guys run what you need to on that computer, can you put it on a hard drive and give it to Jeff? I think it's important he sees anything first." And then she asked if she could please keep anything she found private. Bob's work mom mentioned she would handle this situation with the utmost care, and how sad she was for us. For all of us. She drove off and I put the box down and opened it. There was a picture framed of Nash and I. A Pendleton coaster, a bright blue Yeti water bottle, pens, notepad. You get the idea. The usual. Those things didn't have much emotion to me. They were from a desk of a life he was portraying, not the life he was living. That job gave him the opportunity to be in a place where he had access to be reckless. But it wasn't the job, or its location, or the apps he was using. It was Bob. And I'd learned that quickly. But I had my human moments. I knew Bob was ultimately responsible. I knew I was responsible. I just knew there were some aspects that were making it easier. But easy or hard, that doesn't dictate how someone will respond. The person does. The soul. And Bob's soul, well, he was here to teach me much bigger lessons gone than when he was here. I had my moments with the apps he used. I had moments of creating accounts myself and seeing what that world even looked like or how it was even set up. I will say, I was horrified and sad and hurt. This lifestyle was set up to be secretive. Deception fueled its purpose, its drive. The app had an option to pick a fake image as the app logo. So if someone saw your phone, they'd have no clue. One of them was a flower. They also had terms and pop-ups that made you accept the risk you were putting yourself in to act in such a frivolous way. I didn't see anything about accepting the terms of what you could be doing to the ones you love, or the ones who love you, or the spouses or significant others or children you might be hurting by putting at risk, or the fact you were playing Russian roulette with their lives. Nash and I were the lucky ones. We got out with any life-shortening illnesses. But I know not everyone is so lucky. HIV is a topic amongst the app. It's an option of a possibility you accept and the responsibility to get tested and make others aware if they're at risk. There's even options to add it to your profile, as well as if you're married or not. That's a popular one. And to no surprise, most that are married don't have their face in their profile picture. It's a torso shot. One very similar to the picture I described that my parents got in that anonymous letter they received years ago. Before you think I have a lot of stories to tell on this front, I'll tell you I got far enough to see that wasn't where my attention needed to be, where my energy was worth investing. I also was not about tricking or fooling anyone. I was the most raw and honest I had ever been. I was in no way going to be a part of anyone else's pain or feeling of deception. I never spoke to anyone, nor was I on there long enough for anyone to speak to me. I saw what I needed to see. I saw how much work it was to create the account, and until I dated myself down the road, did I see how much work it is to manage dating apps. How did he even have that time? I never was on the dating apps just to meet up for sex, and I actually never had much luck past a first date. But it's like another job, keeping up with the reality of online dating. I barely could get past an interaction without telling the girls or Par about it. How did Bob do this for so long, and in secret? Maybe this is part of why he felt so alone, why he felt like no one would understand him. I got word from his coworker a couple days later that they had ran a diagnostic on Bob's computer, and she said they didn't find anything. She was getting the hint, though, that there was something to find, but she wasn't really sure what that was, and I wasn't telling her. But she did say, "We did notice that we can see on Thursday morning, Bob wiped his computer clean." Thursday night is when Bob died. He was at work that day. He made sure to wipe his computer clean. What was he wanting us not to find? Then it hit me. He already knew he was going to do this. He had decided, maybe even before that day, but that morning, he had it in his head this was happening. And at work that day, she explained to me what that looked like. He was in a conference room most of the day, working. Probably wiping his computer clean. And he did meet with HR like he said. And he did confirm the benefits his company has. She said he was quiet and to himself. And he left work that day not saying goodbye to her, which she said was abnormal. There wasn't going to be anything I could say to change Bob's mind. And when he called me that day, and we had the best conversation we ever had, he was saying his goodbye to me. Makes sense why he got choked up when he thanked me for being there for him. He knew we weren't going to talk again. He knew when he went to that therapist appointment, he was just checking boxes and going through the motions. He knew when he saw those texts I sent with pictures of Nash, he knew he was saying goodbye to him too. He was done. He was done fighting. The next day I got a letter in the mail, sent to my parents' house. Changing my address was on the list of to-dos, but that wasn't done yet, so getting mail there was rare. I saw it was from the coroner's office. I opened it to see it was the incident report. I read through it and found a couple spots that caught my eye. One was the scene when Bob was found, my guess by the police officer. He explained the scene, in less detail than I've shared with all of you, but a detail caught my eye. The explanation of the position of a chair under Bob when he was found. His feet were straddling either side of the chair he initially stood on. He could have stepped back onto that chair. And he didn't. He really didn't want to be here. My thought that maybe he started this and decided he had made a mistake and wanted to stay. He wanted to do the work. He wanted to get the help. He wanted to create a different story. I don't know that that was the case. I needed to let that idea go. I needed to let go that Bob wanted to be here. It was us that wanted him here. And that was never going to last if he didn't feel it, no matter how hard any of us tried. He needed to want to be here. And I know I've said these things similar before, but it's worth repeating. We cannot make anyone want to stay. They have to want it. It starts with them. No matter how much help they get or support, none of it registers unless they want the same end result. Bob very badly wanted to leave, and it had nothing to do with those of us here. He was running from himself. And we all can probably relate to having that feeling of crawling in our own skin, wanting to run away from ourselves. We have an opportunity as a collective to stop trying to run from the one person who has our backs always, who is meant to love us unconditionally, ourselves. Just acknowledging that is expansive and shifts the energy. Try it. From here is where we can attract and create an abundance of that from others. So maybe if we stop making ourselves the bad guy, we can start being part of the solution. The eeriest thing to me that wasn't going away was that I felt like Bob was around, like an energy and a spirit kind of way. I can't quite explain it, so that's saying a lot, right? But working through the fears and trauma on their own was a lot, let alone feeling like his energy was around, like he was following me. That was uncomfortable. I was anticipating something out of like a scary movie. Like one night before bed, I was just going to see his silhouette or his reflection to then turn around and see nothing there. This is where I was at. This is why the nighttime scared me. A presence or energy of someone who has passed on can be very comforting, knowing they're like a guardian angel watching over us. But this felt very different though. This wasn't the energy of someone just being this light presence of support and guidance and love. It felt heavy and scary. I also wasn't to the point of feeling like Bob's presence and energy in any way would be comforting to me at all. And I didn't even understand that or how it was even an option. It actually scared me to death. When I say it felt like a nightmare, I am not exaggerating. Of course, I knew it was weird enough to not go into detail with anyone about it. I was processing it still myself. But I did often tell my family and friends I felt like he was around. Luckily, they didn't make me feel crazy, and instead, they believed me. And I think they felt bad. But really, who whispered my name in my ear that night? Was that him? Was it a dream? The cycle of things that happened right after that led me to believe maybe he was trying to get my attention. He wanted me to wake up and read that letter. It was a frenetic energy that I felt, not a calm, peaceful one. And it didn't feel like me or my energy. I felt like something was coming into my space, and it knew to leave during the day and only come back at night. I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm distracted during the day, and the day has a different energy to it. Whatever it was, I wasn't sure. I just knew if I believed in angels and guides, that meant there was this dark side to that too, right? Did Bob just drag me into that world by bringing suicide into my life? Was that dark energy I felt in the garage, did it follow me? I understand now why people think suicide is something you might catch if it's talked about enough, or just the energy of it feels like it could stick to you. I had those same fears. And I've learned a lot, and I'll tell you, someone coming to the decision to take their own life, it breeds for a lifetime. It's not something we just catch. As far as my spirituality and gifts, I felt like I was caught between two worlds, but I didn't have the awareness to know that in fact, that is exactly what was happening. I felt trapped between the limbo of the reality of the physical world and the energetic one I was learning about. And I was scared. And I felt like no one understood me. Like I was broken. But all I knew about the spiritual world so far was that it freaked me the fuck out. I think it can tend to get a bad rap because there are spiritual people out there with dark intentions. Or we feel like we have no say about energies and how they affect us or make us feel. I guess that's similar to how we feel in life, right? With the people around us. Like we have no say how they come into our life or what they can do while they're here. Or even being scared of the spiritual side of things and acknowledging energies are even around us. Well, what I want to share is we are the ones that have that power. Think of bad energies or spirits like gnats. That's what they are compared to us living, breathing spiritual beings in these physical bodies. They don't have the power we do. Same can be said for people we think that don't have the best intentions, right? Or have a dark energy to them that we pick up on. All we need to do is just learn how to protect ourselves and our space and set boundaries. There are unique ways we can do this. There's also this understanding in many things that healers might not acknowledge physical actions and only think energy and woo is the way to go. Well, that couldn't be more false. I can only speak for myself, but the real difference is not just the energetic tools and the knowing, but that's where it starts. By understanding that concept, we are creating space to create opportunities or attract situations or solutions that unlock opportunities to this physical world. We need both, the energetic and the physical. It was the week of the service, and Par and my sister were adamant I find something new to wear. The suggestion to guests was no black, and cowboy boots welcomed. We got handkerchiefs for snot rags, for crying out loud. So me showing up in my attire of all black wasn't an option. So we went on an adventure to Nordstrom and found the perfect dress, and just happened to find a pair of short cowgirl boots to go with it. Oddly, it all came together easily and effortlessly. Probably because I gave two shits on what I was going to wear. I had limited brain power, and what I wore to this service was not at the top of that list. The days following, Par had booked a manicure bus to come to her house so we all could get manicures and pedicures. While we were getting our nails done, we were in the thick of Par getting my house sold. It had multiple offers and people going through it, and we were coming up on the offer window closing. We wanted this over and done before the service. It was our goal, and she made it happen. Well, with all the girls and Par, and even some of their husbands on the front lines, it was all coming together. The house was ready to be given to somebody else. The fact that we had people that were so interested was exciting in itself. I just didn't know if it was going to sit there forever. And here we had so many people putting in offers. But we did have this pit in our stomach about how would we tell people what happened in the house. We were not about secrets, as you can imagine. And we knew if this were us, we would want to know. So it was a non-discussion. So Par, getting a call was great. But we all had this pit in our stomach knowing that this conversation was looming. With that, I think the real worry was I going to be stuck with this house forever? I didn't even like that house to begin with. I wonder why. And in the middle of pedicures, Par's phone rang. The selling agent was calling, and Par left to take the call. Long story short, I learned later, the neighbors had mentioned something and got the agent curious. So after asking Par some questions, which she answered truthfully, he said he would pass along the info to the buyers and call her back. From what she described, it was the longest few minutes of her life, and my mom's, who was sitting in front of her while she was waiting. Then her phone rang. They still wanted the house. They loved it, and it didn't bother them. The excitement was unbearable. It was more so for what this represented. Nash and I, we were going to be okay. We were going to be able to move on from this house, and I was going to have some money to live off of so I could start this new life for us. It was the start to seeing and feeling like I was being watched out for, even amongst the hard stuff. I wasn't alone. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't being punished. I was being redirected. As the service weekend came up, there were close family and friends that were flying in and arriving from all over. My parents took this as an obligation to host everyone. So like a wedding, there was a welcome dinner the night before the service at one of our family favorite restaurants. Then there was an after-dinner gathering at their house, where in traditional fashion, music was blaring and people were dancing in the kitchen. The Cupid Shuffle is my parents' favorite song, and it was blasting through the house from every speaker. We had gotten back from dinner, and Nash was being passed from person to person while bouncing him around and dancing. I stood off to the side by myself and just watched. It was too much. I didn't want people depressed and sad, but what was this? Where was the in-between? I felt my heart start to race, and the effort to hold back tears was getting uncomfortable. I saw that Nash was happy and being held, and I started backing out of the room. I turned to beeline for the front door. I didn't want people to see me or follow me. I didn't want the attention on me. I shut the front door behind me and started walking around the front of the house, with tears running down my face as I was trying to make my way up to the apartment. I just needed a moment alone to compose myself and reset. As I came around the corner, I could see there were people all around. I felt trapped. I didn't want to go back in, but I didn't want to make small talk and run the risk of people asking me if I was okay, when obviously I wasn't okay. I didn't want people rushing me or asking me what was wrong, because to be honest, I didn't really even know yet. Everyone looked at me like they were waiting for me to break at any second. like I was fragile and anticipating that one wrong move or piece of information was finally going to be the thing to take me down. I stood behind a car parked in the driveway between my parents' house and the apartment and cried. My back up against the car, trying to stay out of view, I looked up at the sky and wiped my tears from my face. Bob, I wish you were here. This was the start of having to do everything alone. The realization that this life was just me now. I couldn't remember the last event, gathering, or party I went into alone. This was going to be something I was going to have to embrace. It was happening whether I wanted it to or not. I had a house full of people that traveled from all over to be here to support Nash and I still felt like I was tackling life alone. I have family and friends that were around constantly. It didn't have to do with how many people showed up. I was noticing I was feeling isolated regardless. I felt less alone in a room with Nash at night, with my youngest brother sleeping on the couch in the apartment, than I did in this moment. I was learning a big lesson. I was learning there is a huge difference between being lonely and being alone. I wasn't so much dealing with feeling lonely. Lonely is a perception, and if you notice, changes and is very fleeting. Our thought of being alone feels much more final, more overwhelming to grasp, more definite. Why was being alone so bad? It was unfamiliar, and I knew I could do it, but I saw it as punishment, and I couldn't understand why I was being punished. But I wasn't being punished. It was the start of me being able to see how powerful I am on my own. Do you know how freeing that is? To know when life goes crazy, you have the knowing that you have your own back. And not in an aggressively independent way. We are human beings that thrive on connection and support. But like in a homeostasis kind of way. In a balanced, everything just clicks, relaxed nervous system kind of way. A couple more minutes went by and I was pulling myself together, trying to figure out where to go next. The next thing I know, I see my mom run around from the front of the house and she spots me. It was dark out, but I could tell it was her. I could tell she was looking for me. She came over to me and saw I was visibly upset. Through tears, I said, "This is just a lot, and it's really hard, Mom." She threw her hands around me and hugged me, hard. When she gets emotional, she has like superhuman strength, and she was squeezing the life out of me. She said in my ear, "I'm so sorry, honey. We just don't know how to be. We don't know how to do this." I instantly felt seen. I instantly felt less alone. She got it. We, although dealing with this in different ways and it affecting us differently, our connecting point was the same. We didn't know how to do this and how to be, and it was hard. Just then, my dad came around the corner, now looking for both of us. My mom filled him in and he stood there. She brushed past it and said the party was winding down and asked what I wanted to do. I didn't want everyone to see me crying, but as we were deciding, you could tell people were wrapping up and the night was winding down naturally. I guess the crying widow is a real buzzkill at a party. In all fairness, I think that night, the party was already slowing down anyways. And in all seriousness, I don't think many people even knew what was happening outside. As people were leaving, I was able to scoop up Nash and take him up to the apartment to start our bedtime routine. As I was getting him ready for bed, my youngest brother showed up in his plaid pajama pants and sweatshirt and said, "I'm here for the party," as he motioned to the couch he was about to sleep on. I smiled. I was grateful for him those nights that sleeping alone felt scary. I took Nash into our room to try and rock him to sleep. Tears streamed down my face as he was fighting it, with his head taking breaks on my shoulder out of exhaustion. It wasn't past me that Nash could feel what was happening too, even though he was just a baby. I felt overwhelmed, but present for the pace and rhythm my life was taking. But I could only imagine what that felt like for him. I eventually got Nash to sleep, and as I laid him in his crib, the second I let go of him, he started to move and wiggle, and he woke up and stared at me. Damn it. He stood up to reach for me to pick him up out of his crib. I took a deep sigh. That was a lot of work to have that be the outcome. I knew out of all nights we probably could use each other's company. Being fully clothed still in what I wore to dinner, I scooped Nash up, threw the pillows off the bed with my free hand, and pulled back the sheets. I laid in bed with Nash curled up in my arms. He instantly fell asleep. Maybe he wanted to feel less alone too. Maybe without words. This was my way of telling him what my mom told me. I am so sorry, honey. I just don't know how to be. I don't know how to do this. I just stared at his sweet face as I started to drift off to sleep, knowing tomorrow was going to be a tough day. The service day was here and everyone had a quiet, calm, chaotic energy. My family, all being in town, was getting ready and heading to the service early. So, Nash and I were at the house, and it's weird to figure out what to do with your free time before your husband's service with your 16-month-old. They don't write books on that shit. They should, though. Maybe that will be my next task. The time to leave came quick, and I went downstairs and people were filing out. I realized Nash and I were going to head to the service on our own. It felt weird, but it also didn't. Car drives were my meditation, so having the quiet and just getting to be with Nash was probably the best for both of us. I got us ready and into the car, and as we made our way there, my mind was racing, yet was also calm. When you go through a trauma so extreme, it's really hard to rattle us or make us nervous. The little things don't hold the weight like they once did, at least until that initial trauma wears off. And some things stay small and never take up your brain space again, because you have experienced a level of worry that makes most things not even register on your radar. I knew I wasn't going to be able to speak at the service, and I'm sure you're not surprised. Par, about to drop her fourth kiddo out of her body. I take that back. I wish kids just drop out. I made that sound way easier than what really happens. But she very willingly offered to do it for me. So I decided to write a letter to Bob. My first run through at writing. I didn't even know what I was doing. But I wrote him a letter. I also write him a letter on the 1 year of his passing that I'll read to you in the next episode. But I figured I would read this letter to all of you that I wrote for him on the service day. And as I read it, I realized everything I wrote I already covered through these episodes at one point or another. But I will tell you, Par read it with composure and grace, and sitting in the front row with tears streaming down my cheeks, with sunglasses on and not making eye contact with anyone, it was a very beautiful, pure moment for everyone there. Even the little moments we got to laugh were beautiful, like in moments of people's letters when they shared memories and stories about Bob. Or when Par went up to the podium to read my letter, and her stomach hit the podium before she even made her way up there, and it started to roll down the aisle a bit. The things I've shared with you are pretty much an extended version of that letter. I will tell you, I brought up how I hadn't opened a door in our 14 years together, and that I was going to get a lot of practice doing that now. I've had a lot of people who have stepped up to hold that door, and I got really good at holding it for myself and Nash, which allowed me to open the opportunity to align and find that person who can hold it open for both of us, even though they know we can do it on our own. How much more powerful that is, to let someone do it, not because we don't know if we can, but because we just don't need to. In the service letter, I also talked about unforgettable adventures that Bob would joke and say he was always taking Nash and Alvin on, even if they just went on a walk or a hike so I could sleep in or shower without someone needing something from me. I told Bob in that letter I would pick up that piece. I would make sure those adventures continued. I'd like to think Nash and I are just getting started. The day after the service was the first day life felt different. I felt like this was the first day of putting one foot in front of the other and figuring out what to do next. As I laid in bed that next morning with Nash still sleeping next to me, I opened up my social media accounts for the first time since Bob died. And I made a post. It was a picture my sister had taken of Nash and I, out front of the barn where the service was. Nash holding my sunglasses, and me at his level holding him from behind, my cheek to his. And it said, "Yesterday was the best case scenario for the worst situation. Bob, if you could have seen the support and heard the stories and letters, you'd be pretty proud of this family and life you created. We will miss you forever. Well, Mr. Nash, it's you and me, buddy, and this amazing village that has rallied around us. Today is the day we start putting one foot in front of the other and have each other's backs forever and ever. I got you, my love. Since my methods these days was absorbing information and new tools to put in this life toolbox, it's like I was naturally getting connected with what I call now my team. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe all things have a purpose and intention to guide us on this life journey. Even the things we can't really make sense of, those are the pieces I find the most magical. That means true guidance is in motion, if I can't even comprehend how it was possible. This was a period of life where Source was crossing my paths with all the people that were going to help build me back up and support me in molding myself back into this new form I was meant to live this new life as. I was getting set up and I could feel it. Looking back, it's obvious, but in the moment, I could just tell things were aligning and I was getting a taste for what that feels like. Randomly, one day I was scrolling Instagram and I came across a post from a healer. I had worked with him and been introduced to him through my mom years ago. I couldn't afford to keep up sessions and life got crazy, as you know. So imagine my surprise when he popped up on my screen and I thought, this is a part of the puzzle. Even if just for a session. That intuition was in full effect and I was practicing following it. I released the fear of what limiting beliefs I had on money and its role in my life, and I booked a healing session with who is still to this day my mentor and teacher, Alessandro. He knew my family and Bob and how badly we were trying for kids the last time we spoke. So if anything, I felt like it was a good catch-up session. I always enjoyed his presence and guidance and always left sessions feeling better. Our catch-up session together was one of the most impactful shifting points of my life, and continue to be. I explained my story, which we broke down, what was at the root of all of it, and how this happened, what my purpose here is, and how to understand why this was happening. What I was able to do is I could take this gift and it all and make sure nothing like this happens ever again. We talked a lot about the things I was doing for me, and we noticed there weren't many. And that understanding of learning to focus back on that was actually what was going to be the best for Nash. Because at this point, he was my main focus. And he made it very clear that to help Nash, I had to start with me. He also made it very clear that Nash and I were just scratching the surface of what life had for us from this point forward. We ended up having sessions every week. In the beginning, as I got my life sea legs back, and I was moving through things at lightning speed. So much so, I think the people around me were confused. To me, it didn't feel fast though, it just felt right. Not rushed, not delayed, just right on time. I was still dealing with stuff, and I am human, but it felt different. It felt like it had a purpose, even the painful parts. Instead of just the torture of dealing with pain and feeling like there's no reason to it, I was learning ways to view it differently and use it to my advantage. I was giving my emotions and feelings full acknowledgement with shifts along the way to help me move through fully and completely. I was getting a taste for how life can be and how I can let it work in my favor. Another person I added onto the team, who I now call my crystal dealer. Think of her like a spiritual as fuck Julia Roberts. Looks and all. She was a breath of fresh air. And when we first connected, we chatted on the phone and she was on a girls' trip. We scheduled a time to talk, crystals, for the following week. I was doing everything and anything to help with how I was feeling, for protection, for clearing, and it just felt right. It was all about doing things that felt right. I needed to find me. I needed to find me for Nash. So it felt good. And I went with it. It's much easier than you might think. Before I got off the phone with her, she asked me if someone had passed recently. And the things she started to ask, she just wouldn't have known any other way. She mentioned she has the gift of mediumship, which is speaking for those that have passed on, but doesn't really do much with it. It's not her main thing. It's just if people ask or something comes up. So this was something coming up. She said so much so that she doesn't even have a cost associated with it. That if it resonates with me, I can throw her a couple bucks if that felt right. Or else she's just giving me the information regardless. Well, she didn't have to say any more. I was into it. So telling her I was very interested, we planned a time to talk for the week she was back. And before we got off the phone, she said, I just gotta ask, do you write? And I quickly said, hell no. And I kind of laughed. She said, you don't have a book you're working on? I gave her a flat no. Then she said, well, do you want to write? And I said again, no way. I'm not a writer. She laughed and we both just moved on. And as we were wrapping up the call, again, she acted like something caught her attention. And she said, it's a man that passed, yeah? And I said, yeah, my husband. And she said, I just gotta tell you, he keeps showing me a setting that looks like a Nancy Meyers movie. Now I'll tell you, I love Nancy Meyers movies. And if you're not familiar, she's directed movies like The Holiday, It's Complicated, and a bunch of others. But they all have this chic look to them, and a lot of them are based in Santa Barbara. I was confused, but I sat for a second. And then I said, well, we got married at San Ysidro Ranch in Santa Barbara. The place where we got married had a vibe and look very similar to what you would see in a Nancy Meyers movie. And she stopped. Shut the hell up. That's exactly what he's showing me. We laughed and were dumbfounded for a sec. Even those with gifts like this were still in awe with how this beautiful world works. She said, well, sounds like we have a lot to talk about. We got off the phone and our session the week following was on point. Things she wouldn't have known unless Bob was present in some way. And we chatted crystals, of course, and I'd ordered a shit ton. I'll just let it speak for itself. That eventually, I figured out what she meant about writing that day. It was so new at that point, that wasn't even a possibility in my mind. But as you can probably guess, that was short-lived. So the next holiday on deck was Mother's Day. It came up quick, and it actually was around the same day as the closing date on my house. So the house needed to be packed up, cleaned, and furniture and things given away, sold, or stored. My mom, with friends and hired help, tackled the shit out of all the to-dos. It was like I was paralyzed when it came to our house or stepping foot back in it. So although I felt so bad, so many people were having to do so much for me, I had to just let it be. My hands were tied. There was no other option. Going there to help was going to cause more harm than good. And to be honest, I don't know if I could have physically done it. It was obviously Mother's Day for my mom too, and she didn't even hesitate. You need something done, or you need help, or you need an answer, or you need someone to have your back? That's my mom. The prime example of we keep going, we don't give up, and we show up. With the house behind us and life starting to have a new rhythm, again, we were at the end of May, and now it was Par's twin girls' second birthday. She was doing a party at her house and of course invited us to go. Everyone was very sensitive to how situations were going to make me feel, and Par made sure to check in numerous times to make sure I was okay with coming over. I had been really moving through the paces, and with all kinds of therapy and now with consistent healer sessions with Alessandro, crystals galore, and all the other spiritual shit I was getting my hands on, I felt good. I felt ready. So the girl's birthday was obviously a no-brainer, and I headed there with Nash. When I pulled up, I saw it was packed. I knew Par's family like they were my own. We grew up together. So already seeing them at Bob's service, I knew it wouldn't be a drawn-out catch-up or the dreaded I'm sorries. I could just be. Maybe. There were a bunch of Par's neighborhood friends as well as many others I knew well, but I didn't anticipate this was the first social gathering I was going to since Bob died. This was the first time I was showing up on my own in 14 years to a group setting that wasn't my husband's funeral. I started walking up to the door to see the overflow of people outside and in their backyard. It's like the closer I got, I started to realize what was happening. I was coming to our first family event without our whole family, without our person, and everyone knew. But we're trying to act like they had forgotten, and trying really hard not to give us those sad eyes. Nash and I made our way to their backyard, and as I said my initial hellos, Nash wanted to walk, so I put him down to explore. As I did that, I was just taking everything in, almost like so aware it was trancing me. And the next thing I know, I feel Nash at my leg, and he's pulling at my clothes and hugging my knee, like to get my attention. I looked down, and with one arm gripped around my knee and the other one pointing, he said, "Dada." I felt like I got kicked in the stomach. I followed where he was pointing, and there was a man, with his back to us, about 15 feet in front of us. He was with his family. He had a hat on, with a similar build to Bob and hair sticking out the bottom of the hat just like his. He thought it was Bob. My heart hurt for a bunch of reasons. One, that he thought Bob was here. That meant he wasn't understanding, he wasn't coming back. Two, that he thought he would be at a party and he wouldn't come over to say hi to him. And three, he was nervous and hiding behind me, thinking it was him. I scooped Nash up with him on my hip, and I just looked at him and he looked at me. I smiled at him and he just pointed back towards the man, like, can we go over there? He has some explaining to do. A piece of me broke inside as I leaned in towards Nash, and he leaned in towards me, and our foreheads touched. And I was holding back tears. I just smiled at him and shook my head, and with what I could get out, in almost a whisper, I said, "It's not Dada." Always feeling like eyes were on me, I walked with Nash into the house to change scenery. I shook it off, took a deep breath, and by the time I regrouped, a new set of people I knew walked through the door. So I put Nash down and mingled. I turned around to see Nash had wandered out to the front yard, and I went out to look for him. I scanned the front yard where kids were playing, and I didn't see him. Then I spotted him. The man he thought was Bob was now holding him. If my heart had more pieces that could break, this is when they did. He had gone and found the man that looked like Bob, to the point this man was now carrying him around the party. This was a neighborhood friend of ours, but I didn't know them well, yet. He knows the story now, but I think he knew what was happening then too. More appreciation I had for the grace people had that surrounded us during this time, even when they didn't know us well, filled my heart at a time that it felt like it was breaking. I turned my back to compose myself as the tears started to well up. I knew I didn't want a scene, but I knew I needed to go, and ASAP. We made it to the singing happy birthday part, and then we had to go. Park could tell and was very sensitive to how I would feel in any situation. I didn't explain much. I didn't want to take away from the girl's birthday. My life was already taking people away from their everyday lives. But I told her we were heading out, and I don't think she really had to ask why. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I got Nash buckled in his seat, ran around the other side of the car, hopped in, and I felt like before the door was even closed, I had the car on and we were driving home. I looked at Nash in the rear view, and he was just gazing out the window. And with minutes of leaving, the tears. For me. It was probably one of the most pivotal points in my healing that day. It was the most painful on my heart. As I drove home, I was crying and so mad at Bob. So mad I had to do all of this alone, and that Nash's confusion was a result of all of this. It was a heaviness that had reached its peak in my heart, more so than all the other moments, because it had to do with Nash, how this was affecting him. And that shattered my heart in pieces more than anything that he had done to me. I got home that night and up in the apartment after I put Nash to bed. I decided enough was enough. I needed the pain to stop. I needed a way to move through it, to understand it. I had questions. Why was I feeling this way? Why me? How do I help Nash? What is the purpose? I needed to break the pieces apart and see how to find a new way of doing things. I messaged Alessandro and scheduled his next available session. That specific session, we talked about grief. We talked about how this world works when people physically leave and the perspective shifts healing and what it is meant for all of us, let alone for our situation specifically, for Nash and I, and our story. I ended up writing a blog on this because I never wanted anyone to feel that feeling I felt that day. And what I learned? It's something I can genuinely say changed my life forever. My heart repaired in a way overnight that I will be forever grateful and has been on the mend ever since. I never took a step backwards in that pain, and that was priceless to me. I got a way of understanding this and seeing this new life we had ahead of us in a much different light. I'm going to share what we talked about that day in more detail and how I started using it that second. And that will be in an upcoming episode, and I call it the pizza episode. Well, the next holiday that came up quickly was Father's Day. Well, I don't have to tell you how that probably went, but I can say I was extremely grateful for my dad that Father's Day and every single one since. I had a new appreciation for him and his role in my and Nash's life. I also felt the heartstrings tugged for Nash. I got lots of texts that day with friends and family wishing me a happy Father's Day, acknowledging I get to celebrate both now because I was now both for Nash. I had moments throughout that day where I had let go of wanting this day to look like something very specific for Nash. Everyone else in the room that day had their dad, even my parents, except him. I never wanted him to feel left out or excluded. But back to that session I had with Alessandro that day. That day was exactly what it was supposed to be. Nash and I signed up for this journey in life together as is. I needed to leave room for it to be different than what my brain thought it should look like. I needed to leave room for our dynamic and family to be unique and room for the unknown. There is no version where life doesn't work out for us. I was just getting practice of breaking the idea I had in my head of how it was supposed to look. But where did I come up with those ideas anyways? Who said this is the way you do life, and if it doesn't look like X, Y, and Z, you should be sad? Well, it was a belief that no longer was going to be mine. Therefore, it wouldn't be Nash's. But Nash knew no different. And I knew the more I got on board with that, the better off Nash would be. Nash didn't need to pick up on my stuff, what I was wanting to be different. I needed to let it be what it is, and maybe follow Nash's lead. The beginning of me seeing that here I thought I was put here to teach Nash. And maybe it's the other way around. With Father's Day behind us and summer in full swing, I woke up one morning to start my new life routines I had started implementing. I had signed up for a gym I had always wanted to be a part of, but felt like it wasn't worth it or couldn't spend the money. I realized by telling myself I wasn't worth a gym membership, well, that wasn't a habit I was going to continue. Taking care of myself was going to be worth its weight in gold for everyone. This is how I was going to be my best self so I could pull myself through this and show up for Nash. So bougie gym membership it is. I was doing my usual morning check-in on social media while throwing all the breakfast foods on Nash's high chair tray. I opened up Instagram to see I had a message from someone I wasn't friends with. And it started with, "I'm sorry for reaching out via Instagram." It was from a younger man, about Bob's age, clean-cut, handsome, and he implied he was an acquaintance of Bob's and had recently done a Google search and came across his obituary. My face got flushed and my heart started to race. I could feel it pounding in my throat. I knew exactly who this was. And he was not just an acquaintance. Thanks so much for being here. Please rate, like, share, and review so we can stay connected and continue this magical journey together.